Okay, I think we're live now. Okay, good morning, everybody. So let's recap a little bit. Life is tough. Life is challenging. A lot of different areas of life pose challenge. I feel like we're at like a UN meeting here. Nobody's sitting in the middle here. This is weird. Okay, we'll conduct ourselves as a board meeting here. Anyway, so life is challenging. There's a lot of different areas of life that pose challenge. And the challenge is defined by the fact that we need to be preoccupied with different things. So we have to, good morning, welcome. We have to be preoccupied with taking care of our bodies. We have to be preoccupied with navigating relationships. One of the things that consumes most of our time is providing a living for our families, for ourselves, earning an income, managing our money, dealing with all of the stuff that comes along with that. And at first glance, it's you might say it's a necessary evil. It's a nuisance. So this discourse has frames for us that the flood of Noach, the waters of the flood of Noach, Kabbalah tells us represents the many waters that seem to want to overwhelm us, to drown us from being able to maintain our divine equilibrium. In other words, the reality is that we spend the majority of our hours preoccupied with material things. And deep down, each of us want to live higher. We want to live for a greater purpose. And even, by the way, even work. For the most part, we go to work to make money so that we can use that money to live the life we want to live, right? The end game is not work. Now, in some instances, as we've discussed, if you're an educator, if you're a doctor, so oftentimes the profession itself is directly beneficial to the people that you're serving, as opposed to, you could be in the tech industry, and in a broad sense, you're helping the world, maybe, but the direct activities are not necessarily aligned with that. So we spend so much time busy making a living, and one can think that it's a necessary evil. So Kabbalah tells us that the many waters of the floods of Noach, which represents the many waters that seem to want to overwhelm us, are actually very much intentional. It's very much part of the design. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And what is the purpose of these many waters? So in a very simple way, when we face challenge, and I'll give you a live story that happened exactly 12 hours ago. I'll tell you the story in a second. So when we face challenge and we realize that God is in the challenge, so immediately the challenge becomes purposeful. Immediately the challenge exposes God in a way that he would not be exposed otherwise. If you go to the gym and you raise the amount of weight that's easy for you to do, you're not growing your muscles. So spiritually, if for us to grow spiritually, we must face challenge, and we must discover in the challenge that God is hiding right there. And that, by the way, that's it. As soon as you realize that God is there in the challenge, game up. So last night we went to a bar mitzvah at the Delta Museum, if you know where that is, down by the airport. And I'm coming off a little bit of a cold. So we were there for a good hour and a half, and I said, it's time to go home. Okay, so we started heading home. We get onto the highway, and as you come down from Langford Parkway, you get onto 7585, and we already see in the distance it's backed up. So usually you see it's backed up, but this was obvious that it wasn't just backed up, it was a parking lot. But it was too late. There was nowhere to go. And the closest exit was 2.5 miles up. So it took us an hour and a half to get those 2 miles until we got off the exit and wound our way around Midtown. The whole highway shut down. I looked online today, tried to figure out what had happened. It was unclear. Anyway, so sitting there, I was thinking to myself, it's late, I'm tired. What is the purpose in being here? Like what, God, I can't even reach out to anybody. You know, it's like sometimes you get stuck in the airport, you say, excuse me, are you Jewish? Can we wrap tefillin? Do you have a mezuzah? Talk Judaism? What am I doing on this highway? Like what is your plan here? Give me something to do. Anyway, and I settled on that I don't have to know. I just need to know that it's intentional. And I'm going to ride the wave. So I stayed calm for the hour and a half. I had my moments, but more or less we stayed calm, right? But the reality is, I would have much rather have seen why that happens so I can connect the dots and make sense of it, but it doesn't, we're not always so fortunate. And sometimes we actually have to go through circumstances that are not so obvious, because otherwise, if every time we saw how the dots connect, it would be game up. Like, if it works every time, then you know, okay, I just got to wait another few minutes and I'll see why all these things needed to happen. Sometimes you can't see the outcome because then it makes the rest of the time real. Anyway, back to subject matter. So the many waters of the flood of Noah, which represents the challenges of making a living, as we said, and I'm not going to say this too many more times, but it really extends to all engagement in the material, taking care of our bodies, taking care of our homes, taking care of our relationships. All of these material things are all included in this, but the highlight and the focus of this discourse and in Kabbalah is specifically on the role of making a living. And the reason for that is because that's where we spend the majority of our time, and it's the fuel that allows for everything else on a material level to work. So King Solomon says, Mayim Rabim lo yuchlu chabes hazav, the many waters cannot extinguish the love, unaharis lo yishtafu, and the rivers cannot wash away the love that we have for God. Love here means a consciousness that God is in charge, that God is invested, that this is not a jungle, but that it's being orchestrated. So despite the fact that we might be overwhelmed with all the stuff that's going on, King Solomon is reminding us, and this is the message of the flood of Noah, that God is in the story, and the purpose of the many waters is not just that it cannot wash away the love, that it cannot extinguish the love, but actually it's through the waters, it's through the challenge that we actually expose the love for God that we would never be able to expose otherwise. So that's what we discussed in general. In the last class, we discussed why specifically is that so. So we understand that the soul living in heaven, in God's presence, because it doesn't face challenge, so therefore it doesn't necessarily access a deeper dimension. Much better view, right? It's a much more profound experience. So you say, okay, so the soul comes down and it goes through challenge. And then when it goes through that challenge, it has an experience that's greater than the soul in heaven. Does that make sense? And the answer is, it's precisely so. And in order to understand that, we have two critical things that are introduced. The first is what we know as the world of chaos, the world of tohu. The basic story is that when God created the world, the Torah tells us this in metaphor, not metaphor, in hint. In the second verse of the Torah, it says, first verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The second verse says, and the earth was chaotic, tohu vavohu, and empty, v'choshech al pnei sahom, and there was darkness over the face of the deep. Right? So when God created the world, immediately after creation, there's this darkness that exists. What is this darkness? So the Kabbalah tells us this is what's known as the world of tohu, the world of chaos. What is the world of chaos? So basic Kabbalah introduces us to the principle of the 10 building blocks of creation, otherwise known as the 10 Sefirot. These 10 critical things, we only understand them through the microcosm of the person because we can't really understand the spiritual reality. So within the human condition, we have intellect and emotion. We have thought, speech, and action. And there's a function to how the body works. We have an idea, we have the genesis of an idea, we have the development of an idea, we have the application of idea. If you're not familiar, that's what Chabad is. Chabad is Chachma, Bina, Das. Chachma is the spark of an idea, Bina is the development of idea, Das is the application of an idea. And then we have 7 emotional characteristics: kindness, discipline, compassion, endurance, bonding, humility, and nobility. The human experience navigates, we live in that space, right? We live in our head and we live in our heart. And everything that gets expressed, everything we think about, everything we speak about, everything we do is an expression of that inner world. So these are the 10, if they're the 10 building blocks within the human condition, where do they come from? They come from the macro, which is the divine structure. Now, I guarantee you, if you go to heaven, you're not going to find kindness as we understand it there. And you're not going to find wisdom as we understand it there. But we have no other tools other than this language to talk about something that it's like when you look in a mirror, right? What do you see in a mirror? You see a nose and eyes and a mouth and whatever else you see. If you touch the mirror, it's not a nose and an eyes and a mouth. It's a piece of glass, right? So we're looking at the mirror. The mirror is the human, but what it reflects is not anything like us. It's something altogether different. But in some way, in its spiritual evolution, it becomes this thing called emotions and intellect. Now, that's enough said on that. In the 10 building blocks, these 10 building blocks, each one has a powerful energy. And for each energy to be able to manifest itself, it needs a fitting receptacle. So we use the example of kindness, right? If I want to give kindness to someone, meaning my intention is to help that person, so the act of kindness must have a receptacle, a vessel, a recipient that's going to use that kindness in a good way. So, for example, if I get off the highway and there's a drunk there and he puts out his hand and says, "I'm hungry," and you give him $10 because you want to be kind, you're not helping this person. If he's hungry, give him a sandwich. Go down the block and buy him a sandwich if you really want to do kindness. Oftentimes, we don't want to really do kindness. We want to assuage guilt. So here's the $10, leave me alone. But if you actually want to help the person, bring him some food. When your child, it's 8 o'clock at night and your child wants a lollipop and you give your child a lollipop, you're not doing kindness for the child, right? You're hurting the child because you're sugaring the child up and he's not going to be able to sleep. And so it is with discipline as well. Discipline has to be administered effectively. Sometimes you have to hold back discipline in the name of discipline. Sometimes you have to go really hard in the name of discipline. But all of this balance of kindness and discipline and how it gets manifest, and so it is with all the other emotions, by definition, requires that kindness incorporates discipline and discipline incorporates kindness. You can't administer kindness purely. It's impossible. It will always create some kind of damage, as is true with discipline. Every piece of this master building structure that God created requires balance. Now, that's a very sad thought, actually, if you think about it, right? We say kindness is such a beautiful ideal, but in order to administer kindness, you got to water it down. That's sad, right? This may be a little bit harder to swallow, but the same thing is true with discipline. If discipline is a good quality, why should discipline ever need to be watered down? Why should it ever need to have balance? If the quality of discipline itself is such a good quality, why can't there be a place where discipline on its own can be manifest? And the answer is because God created a world intended to be an integrated world. And we saw what happened when God created the world when it wasn't integrated. And that's the world of Tohu. That's the world that we call the world of chaos, where God created each of these 10 dimensions, each of these 10 building blocks, as they are in their purest sense. And spiritually, it was unsustainable. As the Kabbalah tells us, the vessels could not contain the light. Think of a balloon, right? You take a balloon and you try to fill it up with water. At a certain point, the balloon can no longer contain the water, so the balloon explodes. These vessels that were designed to be balanced vessels, when only kindness comes into it, at a certain point, the vessel explodes. And you may be familiar with the term, the shattering of the vessels. In Hebrew, shvirat hakelim. It's a fundamental principle in Kabbalah that when these vessels shattered, those sparks fell into the world. And those sparks are found specifically in the material world. Now we're coming full circle. These sparks, you have a question? Go ahead, please. I'm sorry? Were not able to be contained. Correct. And the chaos was a direct result of this. So the chaos is pre-existing. So the chaos was within that world itself, right? If you can imagine a light show, right? You have these 10 lights that are coming into these vessels, and the vessels are saying, I can't hold you because I can't take kindness by itself. I need to have some kind of integration. But kindness says, no, it's just kindness. That's all I'm giving you. And then the vessel explodes, and this vessel it's straight out of a movie. Each vessel explodes, and these shards start falling down. Now, the chaos, in the sense, the chaos that we have in this world, I'm going to touch on that in a second, because I think that's where this thing evolves. But what happens, the first thing we have to remember is that this wasn't a mistake. God doesn't make mistakes. So if God created this world, he knew that the vessels would not be able to contain the light. And he knew that this thing was going to explode and fall down. So why did God do it? Because we need to have a place where kindness is pure. We need to have a place where discipline is pure. We need to have a place where compassion is pure. It's important for us to never forget the ideal, even if we can't live that ideal, right? When we administer love and kindness, we want it to be full and whole, uncompromised, undiluted. We want that to be that way, right? That yearning for it to be so. And the only way it could be so, we could have that yearning, is if the principle exists, if there's actually a place where kindness is in its purity. In other words, our yearning to find meaning in life does not get overwhelmed, ultimately, does not get washed away by the challenge of making a living, because there's a place where those lights are pure. There's a place where that ideal remains essential. It's undiluted, because, by the way, God is recreating every day. Okay, so now let's bring it back down here. When these sparks fell, we would say that these sparks are very powerful lights. In fact, they're so powerful that they're more powerful than the lights, than the divine revelation that exists in the world of balance. Because by definition, if it's in the world of balance, it means that it's diluted in a manner that it could be integrated. But these lights, these sparks that fell from this world of chaos are far greater than the lights that are in the world of balance. Everybody with me? Where do these lights land? They land in the material world. And specifically in the spaces of the material world that challenge us. In Kabbalah, it says that the lion, the ox, the eagle, these were things that, the imagery that lived on the divine chariot that was in the world of chaos before it shattered. And the physical reality of this world is a manifestation of that. The lion, and so on and so forth. Just parenthetically, if it throws you off, just delete the following comment. Yesterday, we read in the Torah about the gifts that Jacob sent to Esau. And the Kabbalah tells us that this was a very spiritual event that Jacob was trying to accomplish. But one of the things that Jacob sent to Esau was camels. And camels are not a kosher animal. So all the other animals he sent were kosher. Why did he send them non-kosher animals? Because Esau originates in this world of chaos. When he falls down here, it shows up in a very unholy way. But in his origin, he's very holy. And that's what Jacob was trying to transform Esau. And in that place, there's no distinction between kosher and non-kosher. It's so holy that it transcends all of that. And that's why Jacob's one of the only times we find where, quote unquote, a sacrifice, even though he didn't actually make a sacrifice, but the act was an act of sacrifice where he actually sent a non-kosher animal. Okay, let's bring it back here. If you got that, great. If not, like I said, delete. Yes.
Question about that. I don't know if that's related, but you said like Asaph, he was like a representation of the chaos or brought down from chaos. Would the same thing be said about people, that we see these days, like committing like terrible things and or maybe just like you wouldn't like really define them as the holiest. Would they be like a representation of chaos in the world? They fall here from chaos?
Yeah, so I don't want to overstate it. Your point is correct, but I don't want to overstate it. In other words, I don't want to say that people who are wild and high energy come from the world of chaos, because it's not limited to them. It's really because it's a definition of all the space of challenge and all the space of materialism. That challenge shows up with brute strength, and it shows up very, very subtly. And it's the same challenge. So sometimes it's easier for us to, we can think about sometimes we're blessed with children that are very rambunctious, some more than others. And I had a couple of those. I have a couple of those. But I remember when one of them, shall remain nameless, it was very challenging, especially when you're a young parent. Someone said, this one will be something special in the world, right? They got this, they're giving you so much challenge, they got so much energy, they'll be something special in the world. That's true. But it's also true about the subtle challenges, right? A lot of the challenge that we experience doesn't live with a lot of noise. It lives very subtly in our own experience. So challenges that challenge is the world of Tohu. Now, it's easier to identify it because we understand the world of Tohu as brute strength, which was the case with Esau. That's why Isaac wanted to bless Esau, because he wanted to harness that strength. But Rivka said, sorry, it doesn't work that way. You need a Jacob to create that transformation. Esau alone is too far gone. You need to anchor that. Yes.
He also as well, Robert, before he was given the meeting.
So
With that, he also had that kind of
beautiful. Yeah, I would just listen to a beautiful class. So Jacob's whole story was ultimately about making peace with his need to recognize that within himself as a positive. In other words, if we are to change the world, if we're to harness the chaos, we have to first harness the chaos within ourselves. And harnessing the chaos within ourselves means when we recognize an inner challenge, not to move to a place of self-judgment, right? To recognize that that's part of our story. And when we don't, as long as we don't do that, we can't really heal the world. As soon as we accept that who I am is perfectly designed by God's plan, and then I can begin to take that into the world. If I see those challenges internally as something that happened to me, I'm a victim of that, then I want to get rid of it. I don't want to use that in the world. But when Jacob realizes, no, you are holding on to his heel because you're destined to create transformation for Esau. In other words, that part of you is perfectly designed for you to do your job in this world. And that's true for all of us. Make sense? Okay, so yeah.
I'm getting a sense that you're saying that we're all bathed in chaos, just far less of a degree than it was in the beginning, something manageable, something that passes us. And that our struggle, like Jacob's struggle, is something that brings order. However, in much in a chaotic world, to balance different situations, not everything always makes sense to us. But it's not inherently good or evil, it just is. And we have to find it out.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I
It's a question, it's not a.
no, I think what you're saying, like, I think that's an okay way to frame it.
Okay.
I would say it differently, and there's some nuance in what you said that I want to move away from. We don't live in that world of chaos. We live in a world of order. In terms of where the chaos shows up in our world, this is the critical point of the discourse. It's the materialism. That's where the chaos shows up. It doesn't have to be chaotic. By definition, the material world and how it challenges us, here's the shift. It's a profound divine revelation. And because it's so profound, that's why it challenges us. There's a saying, every revelation is concealment, every concealment is revelation, right? Because it challenges us, why does it challenge us? Because in it is the greatest revelation. Now, how do we create integration there? Yes, it's order, but how do we create that order in that space, the integration in that space? Simply by recognizing that this physical reality and the challenges that it poses to us is an expression of a higher divine order. And when we can do that, like I said, game up. As soon as you realize, you don't have to know how all the dots connect. It's always nice when it does. But sitting in a car stuck on a highway for an hour and a half on a Saturday night, and just knowing that God is in this story, it's my limitation that I can't figure out how all the dots connect, but that's okay. The main thing I know is that this is not random. And I also took a moment to reflect that I think there was confusing messages. I think there was some kind of accident. And I imagine if an accident shut down the whole highway, it must be a pretty bad accident. So I was grateful that I'm on this side of it and on that side of it. You know, like these kind of things make some purpose and meaning out of it, even if I don't know the whole story. Give me 1 second. So I want to just bring the punchline back here, because this is the messaging here. The reason that the challenge of making a living, the reason that the challenge of the material world is necessary for us to reach a deeper connection with the divine, as we laid out, that's higher than it would have been had the soul just been in the Garden of Eden. Why did the soul need to come down into a body with all of its challenge in order to reach a higher? Why does that actually work? Because the challenge that is the challenge that's challenging us itself has a higher origin than our experience itself. The challenge itself comes from this world that's much higher than this world. And therefore, just like any superior or higher entity has a certain capacity over that which is below it, so the material world has this ability to activate a part of our soul that would otherwise not be activated. And so when we encounter the challenge in the material world, when we encounter a challenge in trying to make a living, and we recognize that that challenge is there to bring out a part of us that would otherwise not be exposed, then we begin to harness the many waters, the flood of Noach, to bring out within ourselves something that would otherwise not be expressed, which is ultimately not just that the love for God doesn't become quenched, doesn't become extinguished, but actually it becomes ignited, it becomes intensified that we can actually find a greater connection to God than we would otherwise. Go ahead.
Think of an example of the chaos that comes up in the world.
Well, it's and its most simple level, it's trying to make a living. It's you're trying to do a deal, and you have everything laid out, and then boom, something out of left field comes up and throws the whole deal out the window. You know, I speak to, unfortunately, a lot of people in the real estate business, right? That's the nature of real estate, is like, and the bigger the deal, the bigger the frustration. Like, you work on it for months and sometimes years on a deal, and then the last minute something happens. There was supposed to be a whole development here. They actually tried to buy our building. We were negotiating some kind of deal where they would build up the building and give us ownership, and we'd have this brand new space there. Anyway, and then and they were working on this for 3 years, and then boom, there was the interest rates went up and they dropped the whole project, right? Like, you don't have control over that. So what do you do? What do you do when you're on the receiving end of that end result? Like, use a bunch of foul language. Maybe you're angry, you get stressed out, and you scream and you blame this one and you blame that one, and the whole world is at fault, right? Miss the boat. God's in that story. God's in that story. And you know, it doesn't have to be dramatic, by the way. That's what I'm saying, is it doesn't even have to be a negative. It's just the day-to-day routine of dealing with life is a godly opportunity. So speak to people that have a lot of money. I will tell you that it's a nice idea, and there's some cute line I never remembered. It's like, you know, if you're going to be hungry, you might as well be hungry in a Cadillac or something like that, you know. But there's the reality is that the very few people that have a lot of money, number one, that their lives are peaceful. And it's not a throwaway line. I know people, miserable lives, difficult lives, very challenging. And if you think that Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, because they have billions and billions of dollars, they sit back and they don't worry about, they're constantly worrying about their money. How can they make more of it? Where is it being spent? How is someone going to take it away? I mentioned, was it not Randall Hearst? Maybe it was Randall Hearst. No, I'm trying to remember. Anyway, there was a guy, it was a billionaire back in the day, in the 70s. I think it was Randall Hearst, but I may be wrong. Anyway, the Rebbe spoke about this. This is why the story is in my mind, is that he had so much money and he spent his whole life worrying about who's going to take away his money. He died a lonely man. He died a lonely man because he was worried that someone was going to take away his money. Howard Hughes, thank you. Yeah. So it's not about how much money is in the bank. And that's what part of what I'm emphasizing, is that it's how we live, how we have to navigate life, and how we have to navigate making a living, right? Which, by the way, the real making a living is finding the godliness in the living. Making a living is not living. Finding godliness in there is living. Yes. Pride? Say more.
The idea of pride is everywhere. Leads through everything. And I'm wondering if there are a lot of things that can kind of tie into the idea of materialism, even power. You know, it's maybe a controlling of the universe around you, your environment, or lust or something like that. The idea of, you know, you can kind of like tie that into how you interact with material world, but just by itself, without, it seems like it might be a separate thing. Is there a way to tie that into the material idea, or is that, it seems almost.
Are you asking that pride, where do you find the positive in pride?
The fascinating is the idea of chaos, like how it's interacting with things, how you're talking about this concept.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand within your question is how you mentioned lust and power and pride, and how is any negative character trait different than pride in this regard? Or are you really asking about all of them?
Because you were talking about materialism core to creating chaos, like what unleashes it or unlocks it. I'm not sure exactly how, I'm trying to wrap my brain onto the idea of how you're describing kind of how it functions as a system.
Yeah.
So is pride a part of materialism?
Okay.
Or is it intrinsically itself? Like, is it a source of chaos?
So
Working with chaos?
good. So I think for me, you're focused on pride, but I don't think pride is any different than any other negative character traits. They're all the same, and actually that's where the challenge lives. Let me explain. So the chaos, the materialism being the challenge that exposes the light, is like if you can lift 20 pounds and now you're lifting 30 pounds, the 30 pounds is what's going to bring out within you a certain power that you didn't have before. It's going to strengthen your muscles, right? The reason that it works is because you can't lift 30 pounds. You can only lift 20. So now you're going to push yourself to lift 30. You're going to, over time, develop, your muscles going to get stronger, right? Which in the principle is that the chaos, the materialism, is a profound divine light, which is greater than we necessarily in a usual format have access to. When we face that challenge in the materialism and we don't succumb to it, and we realize that it's there to help us grow and that God is found within it, then we grow from that and we actually access a part of ourselves that we would otherwise not access. Now, what's the journey? What's the journey? When I don't know, but we can harp on my story. When I'm stuck in that car on the highway, right? What's the journey that I have to go through? What's the journey that each of us have to go through when it feels like the material world around us is not pushing us to a greater connection, but it's actually drowning us? What do we have to, what's going on inside of us? So for each of us, using our Jacob example, each of us has a unique story. We have a unique, complex makeup. We have strengths, we have flaws, some of which are genetically come with the package, some of them which we adopt in childhood, some of them which we adopt along the way, choices that we make, influences in our lives. But at any given moment, when we have an awareness about a particular struggle that we're dealing with right now, we only have the tools that we have. So what's the struggle? The struggle may be that a person is very prideful, and therefore they feel like someone else damaged the deal, because that's the nature of pride, is like, who's starting up with me? Like, who's stepping on me, right? Or it could be a situation, a lustful situation, where you see an opportunity to do a deal, but you're cutting corners a little bit with the law, and maybe siphoning some stuff off from some other people along the way. But you're lustful because you see a clean opportunity to siphon off some money, and you have to say, whoa, the challenge is coming to me because God is in this story, and God doesn't want me to steal. God doesn't want me to siphon off. And it could be anger. It could be, it could be selfish stinginess. It could be, any number of character deficiencies or flaws that show up. And we actually, the way to navigate through this challenge is, number one, anchoring ourselves in God, as we've discussed many times, having a spiritual practice where we bring God back into our consciousness. We pray in the morning, kiss the mezuzah on the way out of the house, say blessings before you eat, bring a tzedakah box into your workplace, so that your God shows up in your story because of your spiritual practice. But then the next part of it is recognizing that all the self-talk that pushes us to not recognize God in the story is perfectly designed for us in the story. And when we do that, what ends up happening, I mean, just imagine, even on a physical level, physical, emotional level, when you face a challenge and you succeed, you don't succumb to the anger. You realize, you pause. I mean, I felt pretty good last night in the car, not losing it, right? And that's both a very physical, emotional experience. In other words, just as a human being working on character, that felt very good. But it also accesses a part of myself. Because why do I want to navigate that story in a positive way? Like, there's only so much human character development that I'm that interested in. Like, if I want to lose my top because I'm angry about a situation, I want to be angry, right? But there's a part of me that wants to live higher. And that's my soul. My soul says, I want to live higher. So if I want to live higher, I need to realize that what's going on around me is part of a plan. And as soon as I recognize that, as they say, game up. Yes.
Regarding the last thing you said, so there is this kind of debate, and I think, I don't know if it's just in Judaism, but I've heard this idea like whether everything is free will, but everything is also pre-written, and it's kind of like a paradox. So if we have free will, like we're brought here with free will, but our story is pre-written, and you said whenever we're faced with chaos or challenges, also know this is a part of a story that's already, pre-written, and it's a part of a higher plan. How do we negate that? Then we don't have free will, and if everything's pre-written, right?
Yeah, I'll give you the short answer. We actually, we've been doing a course. Anybody here been at the course? The Kabbalah of meaning, which a lot of these ideas are discussed, and one of the areas of discussion are free choice, free will versus, God's knowledge. One way to explain it is the script of life has been written. The actors have not been placed. In other words, when we find ourselves in a given situation, every detail of that situation is perfectly designed for that moment, which means that God placed it. It's what we call individual divine providence. There's nothing in this moment, right here. There's not a thing in this room. There's not a person in this room. There's not an emotion, a thought process that exists right now in this room that's not perfectly designed by God for this moment. And what is the moment? The moment is for me to choose how I'm going to respond to the particular circumstance. Let's play that out. Now I make a choice. The next moment, after the choice is made and I act on that choice, there's a new moment. And we will say that everything in that moment is perfectly designed by God for that moment. Well, how could that be? I just made a choice. The answer is that your choice is only your choice, but the result of your choice is out of your hands, which is why we find that people want to perpetrate bad and they're unsuccessful, and people want to do good and they're unsuccessful. You can have somebody who comes up with the best business strategy. I shared this before. I started a company. I think it was 2008. I had an idea. My brother-in-law took the idea, built a company. We got investors. We had, over time, we had over $1 million in investment. We had an Israeli company that we think was trying to scam us that offered us $4 million to buy the company from us, and they dropped the offer, whatever. Anyway, the company ultimately was sold for debt. A year after the company sold for debt, 5 companies like that came out on the market and made billions of dollars, literally. It's a GoFundMe. It was a first online giving platform. It was called Pushk, like for Pushka. Then we called it eCharity. True story. I wasn't meant to have all that money. Clearly. I was meant to, well, I might have still been here. I mean, I wouldn't have mind, like, with the Cadillac. I could have been here with the money in the bank account, whatever. Right? But I made a choice and I acted on the choice. And God had a different plan. I couldn't determine the result of that, right? I wish the story, in my perception, I wish the story had played out differently, right? But obviously God had a different story for me. And I can beat myself up about all the decisions that we made that should have happened differently, but I'll tell you where I take comfort. It's actually in this principle, and I'll tell you how. There was a book that was written where they interviewed a bunch of these tech, billionaires and asked them, like, what's the secret to your success, right? So everybody is a big chacham when you make a lot of money. Everybody thinks you figured it out. Oh, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I read industry papers for an hour, and then I exercise for an hour, and then I do cold plunges and all kinds of mishagas, right? And this is how I manage my team. And the interviewer dug down with each of these people and came up with the common denominator. After all is said and done, every single one of them said, no matter how smart they were, the reason that they were successful was timing. Was timing. They happened to have a product that the timing in terms of the market was perfect, was correct. And it's still going on, right? You've got, today we have, what's the car, the Uber car, the self-driving car? The Waymo, right? I will tell you, I don't know enough about the specific industry, but you think that Waymo is going to be the leader? It looks like it right now. But it could be that there's some other company behind the scenes that has something, and the timing when they come to market, there were the scooters back in the day. There was a different company, and the company folded because their timing wasn't right. They were a little bit too early to market, a little bit too late to market, whatever. So what does that tell us? It tells us that all of these decisions that we make, the outcomes of it are out of our control. So the script has been written. It's a very comforting thought, even as it's theologically challenging, but it's a comforting thought because we have the responsibility for the choices we make, not on the outcomes of them. The outcome is in God's hand. And that's why, by the way, we say in the prayer, Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will. Why are we saying may it be your will? What we're actually saying is, God, if your will, if the script has been written differently, may it be your will that the script should change. As opposed to when we offer a bracha, a blessing means whatever's in the program, whatever's in the divine bank account, we bless you, it should come down to you, right? But you can't get something out of the bank account that's not in the bank account. So that's why we say Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will that even if it's not in the bank account, God can fund the bank account. Okay, let's move a little further. This brings us to page 21, part 3. And here's where this idea kind of really takes root. This is the meaning of our sages. This is the meaning of our sages, that 1 minute of teshuvah, of returning and good deeds in this world, is greater than all of the world to come. Why is that so? That's a pretty bold statement. Think about it. A soul sits in the Garden of Eden and basks in God's glory. I mean, that's an amazing experience. And one act of kindness, taking a penny and putting it in, well, they don't have pennies anymore, taking a nickel and putting it in the tzedakah box, or giving a sandwich to somebody at the exit of the highway, act is greater than all of the world to come. That's radical. Why is that so? And you know how great the world to come is? The world to come is so great that one of the worst Jews in the Talmud, his name was Acher. He was a person, became a heretic, and it was a hard story. And it says that he was invited to do teshuvah. His teacher went after him, and others, they tried to bring him back. And it says that he rejected it. And the Talmud says that it would have been good for him to suffer all of the suffering that a soul may need to go through, just so he should enter into the world to come. In other words, all the suffering of this world would have been worthwhile for him to go through just so he would enter into the world to come. And now we're saying that the world to come, an act in this world is greater than all the world to come. Why is that so? Because the world to come is revelation. It's all light. It's all lights. This world, in other words, if we look at the structure, you have the world of Tohu, the world of chaos. Then you have the world of order, which is where the Garden of Eden exists. The world to come is in the world of order. Down here is where you get access to this. The world that transcends the world to come, the divine revelation that transcends the world to come, is only accessed in this world, not in the world to come. So one moment in this world, we connect with God in a way that we can never connect in the world to come. That's the power of a day in the life of a human, navigating, making a living. Mayim Rabim, page 22. And this is why the waters of Noach are called the many waters. I'm sorry, this is why the many waters are called the waters of Noach. We asked the question at the beginning of the discourse that in the simple story, the people were bad, so God sent a flood. Noach wasn't bad, he was a good guy. So why are the flood waters attributed to him? They're called the waters of Noach. Like he's getting a bad rep for being a good guy, right? So, but we understand what it means now, because the waters of Noach are not referring only to the flood waters. We're talking to the spiritual meaning of it. The spiritual meaning of the flood waters is the challenge that we face, the material challenge, the challenge that evolves from the world of chaos. And that is a great thing to call the waters of Noach, because that's what brings out our inner strength. That's like your trainer, you're getting angry at your trainer. Why are you giving me more weight? Like, I'm trying to help you here. The waters of Noach are trying to help us. They're trying to bring out a part of us that we would otherwise never get access to. And what happens from these waters? From them becomes a relaxed, a satisfied spirit. In other words, where do we find equilibrium? We find equilibrium when we see in the challenge that it's there to bring us closer to God. After we sweat, you go through a hard sweat, and you come out the other side, and you stay true to yourself. You stay true to your core. You come out the other side, and you feel aligned. You feel at peace. That's Noach. Noach meaning naicha, rest, relaxed. We feel that we did the right thing. We feel aligned. Yes. From the word Noach. Yeah. Noach, in Aramaic, it's naicha, but Noach means to rest. We got more. Shenasa mehem tevas Noach. From these many waters, they attain the level of Tevas Noach. Tevas Noach means literally the ark of Noach. In other words, again, let's use the storyline. There's a flood coming. Because there's a flood coming, you need to build an ark. You got to go into the ark, right? But there's the other storyline, that because there's a flood, because there's a challenge in the world around us, we need to enter into the ark. What's the ark? In Hebrew, ark is teva. And what else does the word teva mean? Teva. Sorry? That's teva. Good. Teva. The word teva means a word. Teva. The word teva means a word. Tet vav he means a word. Tevat Noach means the words, the ark of Noach is the words that bring this equilibrium spirit. What are the words that bring an equilibrium spirit? Don't be shy. What are we doing here? Praying to God and learning Torah. So we pray to God, we anchor ourselves in this messaging, we study Torah, we understand the messaging. So because we have a challenge on the outside in the material world, it pushes us to enter into the words of Torah. Here he says specifically, which are the words of prayer. Like the verse says in the story of the flood, what does God tell Noach? Bo ata v'chol beischa el ateva. You and your whole household enter into the ark. In other words, enter in to the words of prayer. If you want to not just survive the flood, but you want to thrive because of the flood waters, you have to anchor yourself. You can't just, you can try, but it's not sustainable just to hear these ideas and say, okay, I'm going to start implementing them. You got to connect with those ideas. They have to be developed. And that happens through constant study and prayer. Prayer is how we download ideas into our body. So when we enter into the words of prayer and we continuously study, it's what I said before, you have a spiritual practice where it becomes part of your daily routine or on some kind of frequent level, some kind of frequent experience where we're thinking about these ideas. Then when we actually encounter the challenge, we've entered into the words of prayer and Torah, and we stay at peace and we stay calm. The Zeh, and this is the meaning of the words in the continuation of the story. It says, "Vayigbru hamayim ma'od," that the water became very strong. How strong did the flood waters come? Chamesh esrei amma milamayla gavru hamayim. The 15 cubits, which is approximately 30 feet above the highest mountain, was covered by water. So what's the metaphor here? This idea that the waters overpowered everything. Vayigburu, the waters overpowered everything until they covered the highest mountain. Shubechinas tagburis nefesh abahamas abachinas nefesh alikis beisa kaparnas vinyan gashmim. Top of 23. This corresponds to the attempted overpowering of the animal soul over the godly soul in matters of making a living and other material matters. So just like the waters overpowered the mountains, so too the waters of life seem to try to overpower us. It seems like if you were having a conversation with the material challenge says, "Yeah, I'm trying to knock you down." And you say, "But what's your real purpose?" My real purpose is I want to lift you up. But you gotta figure that out, right? So the material world seems to want to crush us. It's trying to overpower us. The animal soul is trying to beat us down. Why? Because through that we strengthen our godly soul and express the godly soul. The advantage of this is that as a result of it, we have what King Solomon says, the advantage of light over darkness, right? This is why it says that the ark traveled on the face of the water. Why is that important for us to know? Traveled on the face of the water. So face in Hebrew, panim, shena panim, right? Panim, it means pnimius, the inner dimension. That's why you say the eyes are a window to the soul, right? You can't really tell what a person is thinking unless you look at their face. That's where relationships live, in the face, because it's an expression of the pnimius, of the inner dimension of the person. So the ark floated along the inner dimension, meaning to tell us that the whole purpose that the ark, that the flood waters were there, was so that the words of Torah should bring out the inner dimension of what's within us so that we can overcome the challenge. I'm not going to make a run for it. Okay, we'll stop here. Questions? Yes.
So would you say that we should all be doing certain things of complex that understand this?
Yeah, so on level one, I don't mean level one like it's like elementary, but level one because we won't always be able to get to level two. So level one is that the challenge is there to reveal the best within us. Level two is trying to dissect What is that going on inside of me? Why do I have that flaw? Why do I have that strength? How do I harness them in my service of God? The circumstances bring that out within us. Good? Huh? Yeah.
Process. A really revolutionary. Because the idea of like, yes, he bird crop, drops to drop piece. I always thought it was kind of like, got that out of the way. He was born, and it's, that was it, right? Do you think that the process, like, almost like it, maybe it, that process of cursing, right, that it calmed, that there was a calming for the curse, but that's just the fact that that maybe it had more to do with what he actually did, that faithfulness, that walking with, building, go.
Yeah.
What do you-
I'm uncomfortable with the idea that someone being born alone brings about this kind of calming effect. And maybe I shouldn't be uncomfortable with it. I'm just telling you that I'm uncomfortable with it. And the Torah doesn't give us that information. In fact, the Torah's introduction to Noach is that he walked with God. And that's the choice that he made. And there's a whole discussion about him walking with God. It says that it was in his generation, and what the idea is that on one level, Noach was an ordinary guy, but chose to live extraordinary. And that's really our story, is that we're all ordinary people, but in the life that we live, in the life that's presented to us, we can be extraordinary. And what does it mean to be extraordinary? Means that that which we call ordinary is not ordinary. It's God's opportunity to communicate with us. And when we recognize that, we become extraordinary. We're living extraordinary. That's Noah's story. All right, to be continued next week. You're welcome.